The crystal champagne flute trembled in my hand, tiny ripples disturbing the golden liquid as my husband Marcus rose to give his anniversary toast. 15 years of marriage, he proclaimed to our gathered friends and colleagues. I watched him closely, noting how his hand kept straying to adjust his Hermes tie, a nervous tell I'd learned to read years ago. Actually, Rebecca's voice cut through the quiet as she stood. Marcus has something else he'd like to share. She withdrew her hand from beneath the napkin, and a diamond ring caught the light, sending prismatic reflections dancing across the white tablecloth. Elizabeth and I have grown apart, Marcus announced, his voice taking on that same tone he used when firing employees. Rebecca and I are in love. We're getting married as soon as the divorce is finalized. The silence that followed was deafening. I lifted my champagne glass, took another measured sip, and smiled. Because in that moment, as he stood there thinking he'd orchestrated my greatest humiliation, I knew exactly how this would end. If this story captivates you, hit that subscribe button now. Tomorrow, I'll reveal exactly how I turned the tables when I showed everyone who really owned his precious company. You won't want to miss what happens next. The crystal champagne flute trembled slightly in my hand, tiny ripples disturbing the golden liquid as Marcus rose to give his anniversary toast. 15 years of marriage, he proclaimed to our gathered friends and colleagues, his voice carrying across the private dining room of Normandy, the most exclusive restaurant in Boston. I watched him closely, noting how his hand kept straying to adjust his Hermes tie, a nervous tell I'd learned to read years ago. Something was off. The air felt charged, like the moment before lightning strikes. Marcus was too polished tonight, too calculated in his movements. Even the way he'd insisted on this lavish celebration seemed forced, especially given his usual disregard for our anniversary. I took a small sip of champagne, letting the bubbles dance on my tongue as I studied the faces around the table. That's when I noticed her, Rebecca Morgan, his new marketing director, seated 3 places down. She was watching him with an intensity that made my skin prickle. Her perfectly manicured fingers toyed with something in her lap, hidden beneath her crisp linen napkin. I'd seen that nervous gesture before in board meetings when executives were about to make career-defining presentations. Elizabeth has been by my side through everything, Marcus continued, his practiced smile never quite reaching his eyes. Through the early struggles of building Hartwell Global from the ground up, through every success and setback, I felt my lips curve into a smile that matched his in insincerity. If only he knew the company he so proudly claimed to have built had been mine since before we'd met my father's legacy, entrusted to me when he passed, with a strict instruction to keep the ownership private until I was ready to take the reins publicly. Marcus had never questioned why a small consulting firm had hired him as CEO with such generous terms. His ego wouldn't allow him to look too closely at his good fortune. And now Marcus paused, his eyes flickering to Rebecca for just a moment too long. As we celebrate 15 years together, I want to thank everyone for being here to share this special evening. The pause that followed felt endless. Rebecca shifted in her seat, her hand tightening around whatever she held beneath the table. I watched as she gave Marcus a slight nod, almost imperceptible to anyone who wasn't looking for it. My heart rate didn't quicken. My breath didn't catch. Instead, a strange calm settled over me as I realized what was about to happen. Actually, Rebecca's voice cut through the quiet, clear and confident as she stood. Marcus has something else he'd like to share. She withdrew her hand from beneath the napkin, and a diamond ring caught the light, sending prismatic reflections dancing across the white tablecloth. The room collectively held its breath. I could feel the weight of all eyes darting between Rebecca, Marcus, and me, their horror, their morbid fascination, their anticipation of the drama about to unfold. Marcus stood straighter, squaring his shoulders like he did before hostile takeover announcements. Elizabeth and I have grown apart, he began, his voice taking on that same tone he used when firing long-term employees. We've been living separate lives for years, and it's time to be honest with everyone. Rebecca and I are in love. We're getting married as soon as the divorce is finalized. The silence that followed was deafening. Faces turned to me, expecting tears, expecting a scene. I could see Marcus tense, preparing for the hysterics he thought would follow. But 15 years of watching him in boardrooms had taught me the power of stillness, of silence. I lifted my champagne glass, took another measured sip, and smiled. Not the practiced social smile I'd worn all evening, but a genuine one that seemed to unsettle Marcus more than any outburst could have, because in that moment, as he stood there thinking he'd orchestrated my greatest humiliation, I knew exactly how this would end. My father had always told me that timing was everything in business and in life. Wait for the moment when they're most confident, most certain of their victory, he'd said. That's when they're most vulnerable. As I set down my glass with deliberate care, I knew that moment was coming. Marcus had just made his final tactical error, and he didn't even know it. The company's annual shareholder meeting was in 3 days. Marcus had been preparing for months to announce a major restructuring, one that would have eliminated several long-term employees who still remembered when my father ran the company. How fitting that it would instead be the day he learned who really owned Hartwell Global. I rose from my seat, smoothing the silk of my black Valentino dress. Congratulations, I said, my voice carrying clearly across the stunned silence. I think it's time for everyone to know the truth. The drive home from Normandy was silent, the city lights blurring past my window like scattered stars. Marcus had left with Rebecca. Of course, his final power play of the evening. I sat in the back of my private car, watching raindrops race down the tinted windows, each one carrying a memory of the past 15 years. James, my driver and one of the few people who knew my true role at Hartwell Global, kept glancing at me in the rearview mirror. He'd been my father's driver before mine, had watched me grow from a determined young heiress into the silent owner of a global empire. Would you like me to take the scenic route, Miss Hartwell? He asked, his voice gentle with understanding. No, I replied, surprising myself with the steadiness in my tone. Take me to the office instead. Boston's financial district rose before us, a forest of glass and steel reaching toward the night sky. Hartwell Global occupied the top 15 floors of the most prestigious building my father's vision made manifest. As we pulled into the private underground garage, I caught my reflection in the window. I expected to see devastation, tears, something that matched the scandal I'd just endured. Instead, I saw clarity. The private elevator hummed as it carried me to the top floor. At this hour, the office was empty save for the security team, who nodded respectfully as I passed. They, too, were part of my father's old guard, loyal to the Hartwell name rather than the man who currently sat in the CEO's chair. I entered my private office, officially listed as a document storage room, and walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows. The city sprawled below, a glittering tapestry of lights and shadows. Somewhere out there, Marcus was probably celebrating with Rebecca, thinking he'd orchestrated the perfect coup. The thought didn't hurt as much as it should have. My phone buzzed incessantly concerned friends, board members who'd been at the dinner, gossip-hungry socialites. I ignored them all, walking instead to the hidden safe behind my father's old painting. Inside lay the document I'd never thought I'd need to use, the original ownership papers of Hartwell Global, along with my father's letter. My dearest Elizabeth, I read aloud, his words as clear now as they were the day he wrote them. If you're reading this, you've decided it's time to step out of the shadows. Remember what I taught you. Power isn't in what you show, it's in what you keep hidden. When the moment comes to reveal yourself, make it count. Make it devastating. Make it a lesson they'll never forget. I settled into my leather chair, spreading the company documents across my desk. Marcus had always been so proud of his rise to CEO, boasting about how he'd been chosen to lead Hartwell Global at such a young age. He'd never questioned why a board of directors would entrust a billion-dollar company to someone barely out of his 30s. His ego had blinded him to the truth that every step of his ascent had been carefully orchestrated. My father had known he was dying when he made me sole owner. The business world isn't ready for a woman your age to take over openly, he'd said. Let them underestimate you, watch, learn, and when you're ready, show them who you really are. I'd followed his advice, playing the role of the supportive wife perfectly. I'd attended charity galas on Marcus's arm, hosted dinner parties for his business associates, smiled and nodded as he took credit for strategies I'd suggested during pillow talk. I'd made myself invisible in plain sight, observing every decision, noting every mistake, learning every weakness in his carefully constructed facade. Opening my laptop, I began reviewing the documents from Monday's shareholder meeting. Marcus had spent months preparing for his big restructuring announcement, his plan to streamline operations by eliminating the old guard my father had put in place. He had no idea that I'd been quietly purchasing more shares through shell companies, consolidating my already controlling interest. By Monday morning, I would own nearly 80% of Hartwell Global's voting shares. A notification popped up on my screen, an email from Rebecca to the board announcing her resignation as marketing director, effective immediately. How considerate of her to save me the trouble. I forwarded it to HR, adding a note to process her exit package without the customary executive bonuses. It was a small thing, but it felt good to flex those muscles again. I spent the next hour reviewing Marcus's recent decisions, seeing them now through the lens of his deception. How many of his business dinners had been with Rebecca? How many company resources had he diverted to impress her? The audit would be thorough, and every misused dollar would be accounted for. Standing. I walked back to the windows. Dawn was breaking over the city, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. In a few hours, Marcus would swagger into this building, probably rehearsing how to spin last night's events to the board. He had no idea that his keycard would be deactivated, his passwords changed, his access to the executive floor revoked. My phone buzzed again, a message from Marcus himself. We should talk about how to handle this professionally. I smiled, remembering all the times I watched him handle corporate takeovers. He always offered to talk professionally, right before he gutted a company. But he'd never faced an opponent who knew his playbook by heart, who had spent 15 years studying his every move. Yes, I typed back. Let's discuss it at Monday's shareholder meeting. The weekend stretched before me like a blank canvas, every hour an opportunity to prepare for Monday's revelation. I spent Saturday morning in my home office, the space Marcus had always dismissed as my hobby room, where I supposedly planned charity events. If he'd ever bothered to look closer, he might have noticed the hidden terminal accessing Hartwell Global's secure servers, or the files detailing every major company decision of the past 15 years. My first call was to Jonathan Reynolds, our long-standing corporate counsel. The irony of his sharing Rebecca's surname wasn't lost on me. They were distant cousins, a fact Marcus had either overlooked or ignored in his arrogance. I saw the guest list for Monday's shareholder meeting, Jonathan said, his tone carefully neutral. I assume you're finally ready? Yes, I replied, pulling up the documentation we prepared years ago. Execute Protocol Athena. There was a pause on the line, followed by the sound of rapid typing. Protocol Athena, named after the goddess of wisdom, was a contingency plan my father had created. It involved a complex series of legal maneuvers designed to lock down the company's assets and freeze any unauthorized transfers. Marcus had no idea it existed, just as he had no idea that Jonathan's true loyalty lay with the Hartwell family. It's done, Jonathan confirmed. All major financial decisions now require dual authorization from both the CEO and the owner. Given that you're the owner, Marcus won't be able to move anything significant before Monday. Perfect, I smiled, imagining Marcus's frustration when he discovered his executive override codes suddenly required secondary approval. What about the other matter? The private investigator's reports are quite thorough, Jonathan replied. 6 months of documentation meetings, expenses, hotel receipts. They've been using the San Francisco acquisition as cover for their relationship. Every trip, every dinner charged to the company account. I leaned back in my chair, processing this information. The San Francisco deal Marcus's pride and joy. The acquisition he claimed would cement his legacy. How fitting that it would instead become evidence of his misconduct. Send copies to HR and the board's ethics committee, I instructed, but hold them until Monday morning, 1 hour before the meeting. After hanging up, I moved to my next task. Opening my laptop, I accessed the company's internal messaging system. As expected, the executive floor was buzzing with weekend activity crisis management in full swing. Rebecca had already cleared out her office, but Marcus was there, probably trying to damage control. I watched his digital footprints as he accessed file after file, attempting to move money between accounts, make last-minute changes to Monday's presentation. Each attempt met with the new security protocols requiring an approval he couldn't obtain. His frustration was evident in the increasingly aggressive way he typed, the multiple failed override attempts. A message popped up from Diana, my father's former secretary and now the board's administrative director. He's calling an emergency board meeting for Sunday afternoon. Claims it's about recent developments affecting company stability. Perfect, I replied. Decline due to insufficient notice. Cite bylaw 47.3. Diana's response came with a hint of satisfaction. Already done. He's not taking it well. I spent the next few hours methodically reviewing the San Francisco acquisition documents. Every detail Marcus and Rebecca had tried to hide was there, buried in expense reports and meeting minutes. They'd been sloppy, confident in their security clearance and Marcus's position as CEO. They hadn't considered that someone higher up might be watching. Around midnight, my phone lit up with Marcus's name. I let it ring, imagining him pacing in his office, tie loosened, hair disheveled from running his hands through it, his typical stress response. When it went to voicemail, he sent a text. The board meeting denial is ridiculous. This situation needs to be addressed before markets open Monday. You're being childish. I screenshot the message, adding it to my growing file. Classic Marcus, attempting to gaslight, to make me appear emotional and unprofessional. It had worked in our marriage, but it would fail spectacularly in the boardroom. Another text followed: Victoria and I are willing to be generous in the divorce settlement. Don't force this into a corporate issue. Generous. The word hung in the air, laden with condescension. He still thought he held all the cards, still believed he was the one with something to offer. His assumption that I would need or want his generosity would be his undoing. I opened our home security app, watching through the cameras as Marcus finally returned to collect some clothes. He moved through the house with entitled confidence, selecting his most expensive suits, his prized watches. I made note of everything he took evidence for the asset freeze Jonathan would implement first thing Monday morning. As he passed through the library, he paused at the photograph of my father and me at my college graduation. It was the only picture in the house that showed us at the Hartwell Global offices, standing before the company logo. Marcus had always assumed it was taken during a casual visit, never questioning why my father's arm was draped proudly around my shoulders as we stood in the CEO's office, his office, which would later become Marcus's and soon would acknowledge its true owner. I watched him shake his head at the photo before leaving, no doubt dismissing it as another painful reminder of the family life he was discarding. In his rush to start his new life with Rebecca, he'd forgotten the first rule of corporate takeovers: know your opponent's true position. Monday was approaching, and with it, the moment Marcus would learn exactly who he'd been sleeping beside for 15 years. Sunday unfolded with the precision of a well-orchestrated symphony. I arrived at the office before dawn, the same outfit I'd worn to the anniversary dinner, now replaced with a tailored Chanel suit in deep navy, my father's favorite color for power moves. The security team nodded with newfound respect. Word had clearly spread through the old guard that the true Hartwell was finally emerging from the shadows. The executive floor was eerily quiet, but the digital landscape told a different story. My private terminal lit up with alerts Marcus had spent the night attempting to access restricted servers, trying to move assets, making desperate calls to board members. Each attempt left a digital fingerprint, each call recorded in the system's logs. His panic was becoming palpable. Sarah Chen, Rebecca's former assistant and my longtime informant, had sent her final report. The details were illuminating. Rebecca had been planning this move for months, carefully orchestrating her announcement to coincide with the San Francisco deal's completion. She believed it would force my quick, quiet departure, leaving her perfectly positioned to step into both my roles as wife and as the company's marketing voice. She's been practicing her new signature, Sarah noted in her report, Mrs. Rebecca Hartwell Morgan. She's already ordered personalized stationery. I allowed myself a small smile at that detail. Rebecca's ambition had made her careless, had led her to celebrate her victory before ensuring her position. It was the same mistake Marcus often made in business, assuming success before the contracts were signed. A gentle knock announced Diana's arrival. She carried a stack of folders and a knowing smile. The board members have been calling all morning, she said, settling into the chair across from my desk. Jonathan Pierce is particularly interested in knowing why his longtime golf partner suddenly can't access the executive accounts. Jonathan Pierce, Marcus's strongest ally on the board, and, not coincidentally, the man who'd introduced him to Rebecca at last year's charity gala. The pieces were falling into place. Let them wonder, I replied, accepting the folders. Have all the necessary documents been delivered to their offices? Diana's smile widened. Every board member received a comprehensive packet this morning by special courier. Your father would be proud. You even used his preferred delivery service. The packets contained irrefutable evidence of Marcus and Rebecca's misuse of company resources, along with detailed documentation of my ownership. By now, the board members would be discovering that their CEO's authority had always been contingent on my silent approval. My phone buzzed with a text from Jonathan. Marcus is in the lobby with his personal lawyer. They're demanding access to the executive floor. Maintain protocol, I replied. No access without proper authorization. I turned to the security feeds, watching as Marcus argued with the lobby security team. His usual polished appearance was notably disheveled, his tie slightly askew, his hair showing signs of a restless night. Beside him, a man in an ill-fitting suit gesticulated wildly, waving what appeared to be hastily printed documents. His lawyer from Caldwell and Brooks, Diana noted, peering at the screen. Third-tier firm, specializes in quick divorces. Clearly, he hasn't figured out what's really happening yet. The thought was oddly satisfying. Marcus had been so focused on orchestrating my personal humiliation that he'd failed to see the larger picture forming around him. He still believed this was about our marriage, about division of assets and prenuptial agreements. He had no idea he was about to face a very different kind of legal battle. I spent the next few hours reviewing the final details from Monday's meeting. The presentation Marcus had prepared, his grand vision for restructuring the company, was still loaded on the system. I scrolled through it with mild amusement, noting how he'd planned to dismiss key employees, all while positioning himself as the company's savior. Around midday, Rebecca made her own attempt to enter the building. The security footage showed her trying to use her executive access card, then becoming increasingly agitated when it was declined. She dressed for a power move red blazer, stiletto heels, perfect makeup, but her composure cracked as she was politely but firmly escorted out. She's called HR 3 times, Sarah reported via secure message, demanding to know why her credentials have been revoked. Should I have them return her calls? No need, I replied. Everything will be clarified in tomorrow's meeting. As the day progressed, more pieces of my strategy fell into place. The private investigators delivered their final report, including photographs of Marcus and Rebecca at various company-funded rendezvous. The audit team completed their review of the San Francisco acquisition, highlighting every questionable expense and unauthorized decision. The legal team finished preparing the documents that would restore my father's name to its rightful place in the company hierarchy. By sunset, the stage was set. I stood at my office window, watching the city lights flicker to life. Somewhere out there, Marcus was probably meeting with his lawyer, planning his defense against what he thought would be a simple divorce proceeding. Rebecca was likely planning her triumphant return to the office, unaware that her career in corporate marketing was about to become collateral damage in a much larger fall from grace. Tomorrow, the carefully constructed world they built on my silence would crumble. Tomorrow, the whispered name of Hartwell would echo through the corridors with its true weight. Tomorrow, they would learn the cost of underestimating the quiet wife who had watched and waited for 15 years. Monday morning arrived with the weight of destiny. I'd spent the night in my father's old apartment, a penthouse suite above the financial district that Marcus never knew existed. The space remained exactly as my father had left it, including his private study where he taught me everything about running Hartwell Global. I dressed with deliberate care, choosing a black Alexander McQueen suit that my father had helped me select years ago, for the day you decide to claim your throne. As he'd put it, the outfit was armor, every detail calculated, diamond studs in my ears, my mother's from the day she joined the board, the vintage Cartier watch my father wore when signing his first billion-dollar deal, and a single ruby ring bearing the Hartwell family crest. James arrived precisely at 7 a.m., his timing impeccable as always. The board members have already started arriving, he reported as we descended to the private garage. Security confirms Mr. Hartwell and Ms. Morgan are attempting to coordinate their entrance strategies. I smiled at their predictability. And the media. Anonymous tips about major changes at Hartwell Global reached every major financial news outlet last night. They're gathering outside the main entrance? Perfect. Marcus had always loved playing to the media, crafting his image as the brilliant CEO who'd built a global empire. Today, that same media attention would serve a different purpose. We took the private entrance, bypassing the growing crowd of reporters, through the tinted windows. I caught glimpses of their expectant faces, cameras ready to capture what they thought would be a standard corporate power play. They had no idea they were about to witness the greatest reversal in Hartwell Global's history. The executive floor was already humming with tension when I arrived. Board members clustered in small groups, their usual confident demeanor replaced by uncertain whispers. They'd had all weekend to review the packets I'd sent, to realize the extent of their CEO's deception and their own oversight. Jonathan met me at my private office, his expression carefully composed. Marcus is in the main boardroom with his lawyer. He's demanding the meeting start early. Let him wait, I replied, settling behind my desk. Has Rebecca arrived? She's in the lobby. Security is holding her there until you give the word. I checked the time, 8:45 a.m. The shareholder meeting was scheduled for 9:30. Have her escorted to the conference room on the floor below. Make sure she has a clear view of the boardroom screens. Jonathan's lips twitched. You want her to watch, I want her to learn, I corrected. Some lessons are best taught through observation. The next 30 minutes passed in a blur of final preparations. Diana coordinated with IT, ensuring all presentation systems were ready. Sarah positioned herself near Rebecca, ready to report any reactions. The old guard employees, loyal to my father's memory, moved through their tasks with barely contained anticipation. At 9:15, I received confirmation that all shareholders were connected virtually, their faces appearing on the secondary screens around the boardroom. Marcus had been trying to engage them in conversation, unaware that most had already switched their allegiance after reviewing my evidence. It's time, Jonathan announced softly. I stood, smoothing my jacket, The weight of my father's watch pressed against my wrist, its steady ticking a reminder of his favorite saying, "In business, timing isn't everything, it's the only thing." The walk to the boardroom felt like crossing a threshold. Every step took me further from the role I played for 15 years and closer to the position I was born to hold. Through the glass walls, I could see Marcus at the head of the table, his back to the door, gesturing emphatically to his increasingly uncomfortable audience. "And so, despite recent personal matters," he was saying, "I assure you that Hartwell Global remains stronger than ever under my leadership." The doors opened. The room fell silent as I entered, followed by Jonathan and Diana. Marcus turned, his expression shifting from annoyance to confusion as he registered my presence. "Elizabeth," he began, his tone condescending, "this is a closed board meeting. Your presence isn't appropriate." "Actually," I cut in, my voice carrying clearly through the room, "my presence is not only appropriate but required." I moved to the opposite end of the table, facing him directly. After all, shouldn't the owner of Hartwell Global attend its most important shareholder meeting? The color drained from Marcus's face, around the table. Board members straightened in their seats, their attention sharpening. On the screens, shareholders leaned closer to their cameras. "Owner!" Marcus's lawyer sputtered, shuffling through his papers. "There must be some mistake. Mr. Hartwell is the chief executive and primary—" "Jonathan," I interrupted smoothly, "please distribute the ownership documents." With practiced efficiency, Jonathan began placing folders before each board member. The room filled with the sound of papers being opened, followed by sharp intakes of breath as the truth was revealed in black and white. Marcus grabbed the folder nearest to him, his hands shaking slightly as he read. I watched his expression change as realization dawned, the same look he'd worn when signing his employment contract 15 years ago, never questioning why a junior executive had been given such an opportunity. "This is impossible," he whispered, but his voice lacked conviction. He was already connecting the dots, remembering all the times his riskier decisions had been mysteriously modified, all the times his more aggressive strategies had been quietly adjusted. "Nothing is impossible," I replied, taking my seat at the head of the table. "Especially not for the daughter of Richard Hartwell." The boardroom crackled with electric tension as my words hung in the air. Marcus's lawyer was frantically flipping through documents, his forehead beating with sweat as he encountered page after page of irrefutable evidence. The board members exchanged glances, their expressions a mix of shock and dawning comprehension. "Richard Hartwell's daughter," Jonathan Pierce repeated slowly, his usual self-assured demeanor cracking. All this time," I confirmed, my voice steady. "I've been exactly where my father placed me at the heart of Hartwell Global, watching, learning, and protecting his legacy." I turned to Marcus, who remained frozen in his chair. "Though I must admit, you made the watching part remarkably easy. You never once questioned why your wife took such an interest in your work discussions." Marcus's throat worked as he swallowed. The private meetings, the late-night strategy sessions were exactly what they appeared to be. I finished for him. A wife supporting her husband's career. The fact that I was also evaluating every decision, guiding outcomes, and protecting the company from your riskier impulses. Well, that was just an added benefit. On the screens above us, shareholders were sending a flood of messages. The chat logs scrolled rapidly as they processed the implications of this revelation. Many were connecting dots they'd never noticed before the company's consistent success, despite some of Marcus's more questionable decisions. The mysterious stability during market downturns, the inexplicable shifts in strategy that always seemed to work out perfectly. "The San Francisco acquisition," Marcus said suddenly, his face paling further. "You knew about Rebecca?" "From the first dinner meeting," I confirmed, nodding to Sarah, who had slipped quietly into the room. She distributed a new set of folders, these ones containing detailed reports of every encounter, every misused company fund, every breach of corporate ethics. Marcus's lawyer began to stand, blustering about privacy violations, but Jonathan smoothly interjected, "All surveillance was conducted within legal corporate guidelines, specifically those outlined in the executive contract Mr. Hartwell signed, page 37, paragraph 4, if you care to review it." I watched as Marcus frantically flipped to the referenced page, no doubt remembering the day he'd signed that contract. Too eager for power to read the fine print the clause my father had insisted on including, knowing someday it would prove vital. "Additionally," I continued, pressing a button on the conference table, "we have a live feed from Conference Room B, where your fiancé is currently watching these proceedings." The central screen split, revealing Rebecca's shocked face as she realized she was now visible to the entire board. "Ms. Morgan," I addressed her directly, I believe you have some expertise in corporate communications. How would you suggest we handle this situation? Rebecca's mouth opened and closed soundlessly, her carefully crafted image crumbling in real time. The red blazer she'd chosen to project power now seemed garish against her rapidly paling complexion. The San Francisco documents? Marcus tried again, grasping for control. The deals, the contracts are all completely legitimate, I assured him. Every signature authorized, every deal properly executed. The only irregularities involve your personal expenses, the ones you tried to hide in the acquisition costs. I gestured to the documents before us, 15 years of meticulous record keeping. Marcus, did you really think no one was watching? Jonathan Pierce cleared his throat. The board should have the board. I cut in smoothly. Operated exactly as my father intended. You provided oversight of the CEO's activities, while the true owner maintained control through other channels. I met his eyes directly. Though I must say, Jonathan, introducing Marcus to Rebecca at your charity gala was an unexpected twist. Were you aware of their intentions? Or was that simply an unfortunate coincidence? Pierce's face reddened as other board members turned to stare at him. His role in the drama was now another piece of the puzzle falling into place. Now, I continued, turning back to the shareholders on screen, let's discuss the company's future. Marcus has prepared a presentation about restructuring Hartwell Global. However, I have a different vision to share. Marcus's lawyer finally found his voice. This is outrageous. Mr. Hartwell's contract clearly states is void, Jonathan interrupted, due to multiple breaches of fiduciary duty and ethics violations, all documented in the reports before you, he added with a slight smile. Additionally, Mr. Hartwell's authority as CEO has always been contingent on the owner's approval, as clearly stated in the company bylaws. I stood, commanding the room's attention. Hartwell Global was built on my father's principles: integrity, innovation, and unwavering dedication to excellence. Over the past 15 years, I've honored those principles from the shadows. Today, that changes. The room held its breath as I moved to the presentation screen. Behind me, I could hear Marcus's ragged breathing, could practically feel the weight of his collapsing world pressing down on him. On the split screen, Rebecca sat motionless, her ambitious dreams of becoming the next Mrs. Hartwell crumbling before her eyes. Shall we begin? I asked, my finger hovering over the presentation remote. The question was rhetorical. Everyone in the room knew that the real presentation had already begun the moment I walked through the door. Everything that followed would simply be the execution of a plan 15 years in the making. The presentation screen flickered to life, but instead of Marcus's planned restructuring proposals, a different set of slides appeared. The Hartwell Global logo dominated the first image, but with a subtle difference, the founding date now correctly listed my father's original establishment of the company, 15 years earlier than the date Marcus had always claimed. As you can see, I began, my voice carrying clearly through the stunned boardroom. There's been some confusion about our company's history. Let's correct that. Shall we? The next slide showed a complex organizational chart, one that had never been made public. At the very top sat Hartwell Holdings, the parent company I'd inherited from my father. Below it, a web of subsidiaries and shell corporations revealed the true structure of our corporate empire, one that made Marcus's position as CEO of Hartwell Global seem almost quaint in comparison. For those wondering about the financial implications, I continued, noting the shareholders' intense focus on their screens, Hartwell Holdings controls not just Hartwell Global, but 7 other major corporations across 3 continents. The San Francisco acquisition, which some of you have expressed concern about, is actually a small piece of a much larger strategy. Marcus's lawyer frantically whispered in his ear, but Marcus seemed beyond hearing. His face had taken on an ashen quality as he stared at the screen, no doubt calculating just how much power he'd never actually had. Ms. Hartwell, one of the shareholders spoke up, their voice sharp through the conference system. Are you suggesting that Hartwell Global's reported market value is inaccurate? Not inaccurate, I corrected smoothly. Incomplete. Hartwell Global's success has been genuine, but it's been carefully managed to appear self-contained. In reality, it's part of a much larger ecosystem. I clicked to the next slide, revealing financial projections that made several board members audibly gasp. These are the true numbers. Gentlemen, your investment has been performing significantly better than you realized. Rebecca, still visible on the split screen, had pulled out her phone, no doubt trying to make sense of what this meant for her future. I watched her expression shift as she presumably found the breaking news headlines. The story had already leaked to the financial press, exactly as planned. Now, I continued, moving to stand directly behind Marcus's chair. Let's address the immediate concerns. First, The San Francisco acquisition will proceed, but under revised terms. Our legal team has already prepared updated contracts that eliminate certain unnecessary expenses. I placed a hand on the back of Marcus's chair, feeling him tense at the touch. Second, the proposed restructuring will not be happening, at least not in the way originally planned. The board approved? Marcus started, finding his voice at last. The board, I cut in smoothly, approved a plan presented by a CEO who they believed held executive authority. That authority, as we've established, was contingent on my approval, which is hereby withdrawn. Jonathan stepped forward, distributing another set of documents. These are the actual restructuring plans, which have been in development for the past year. You'll notice they focus on strengthening our core operations rather than eliminating key personnel. Jonathan Pierce studied the papers intently, his frown deepening. These projections, they're based on market trends that weren't public when— His voice trailed off as understanding dawned. When Marcus began planning his version, I finished for him. Correct. Hartwell Holdings has access to significantly more market data than Hartwell Global. We've been using that information to guide company strategy for years, though of course, we had to be subtle about it. Marcus couldn't know he was implementing my father's long-term vision rather than creating his own. The room fell silent as the full implications sank in. Every major success Marcus had claimed, every brilliant strategy he'd boasted about had been carefully orchestrated. His meteoric rise in the business world had been a carefully constructed illusion, and now, that illusion was shattering. The shareholders will need time to process this, one of the board members ventured. They'll have it, I assured him, along with access to the complete corporate records, which should answer any lingering questions about the company's true position. I paused, allowing a small smile, though I suspect the market's reaction tomorrow will speak for itself. Rebecca's image on the screen suddenly became more animated as she appeared to receive some news on her phone. Her face drained of color as she looked directly into the camera. Ah, I noted. I see Miss Morgan has just discovered that her resignation has been accepted, effective immediately, with certain interesting clauses activated in her termination agreement. I turned to Jonathan. Would you care to explain the standard non-compete clause? Jonathan began, his tone professionally neutral, but with a hint of satisfaction. Has been expanded to include all Hartwell Holdings companies and their subsidiaries. Additionally, given the circumstances of her departure, the ethics violation clauses have been triggered, requiring full repayment of any company resources used for personal matters. Marcus surged to his feet. You can't, actually, I interrupted. I can, and I have, but don't worry. Marcus, your own termination agreement is even more comprehensive, I added, watching his face contort as the reality of his situation finally hit home. You had a much higher position to fall from. The shareholders on screen were now engaged in rapid discussion, their chat log flowing with questions and comments. The board members exchanged loaded glances, already beginning to realign themselves with the true power in the room. And through it all, I maintained my position at the head of the table, exactly where my father had always intended me to be. Outside the boardroom windows, the morning sun had climbed higher, casting long shadows across the cityscape. News helicopters circled the building, their distant chopping sound a reminder of the media frenzy building below. My phone buzzed continuously with notifications as the story spread through financial circles like wildfire. Those quarterly review meetings you found so tedious, the ones you usually sent Rebecca to handle. I smiled as understanding dawned on his face. She was actually reporting directly to my team, though she didn't realize it. Every presentation, every proposal was being evaluated at a much higher level. Rebecca's image on the screen showed her processing this information, no doubt remembering all the meetings she'd thought she was controlling, all the decisions she'd believed were hers to influence. Her carefully constructed plan to rise through the company ranks had been built on completely false assumptions. The Asian markets will be opening soon, Jonathan noted, checking his watch. Shall we proceed with the next phase? I nodded, and he distributed another set of documents to the board members, these ones containing the full strategy for the next 24 hours, hour-by-hour plans for managing the market reaction, handling press inquiries, and restructuring the company's public image. You'll notice, I said to the stunned board members, that your roles in this transition have been carefully considered. Those of you who have demonstrated genuine commitment to the company's success will find your position secured and potentially enhanced. My gaze swept the room. Others may want to consider their options carefully. Several board members shifted uncomfortably in their seats. They were all suddenly reviewing their past decisions, wondering which category they fell into, realizing that every vote, every meeting, every casual conversation had been noted and evaluated. Ms. Hartwell, one of the shareholders spoke up, their voice cautious through the conference system. What are your immediate plans for company leadership? An excellent question, I replied, moving to stand by the window. The media helicopters had multiplied, their cameras no doubt capturing this very moment. Hartwell Global will be undergoing a significant transformation, returning to its roots as a family-owned enterprise while maintaining its position as a global market leader. Marcus's hands clenched on the arms of his chair. Everything he'd thought he'd built, every achievement he'd claimed was being revealed as part of a much larger design, one in which he'd been merely a temporary player, a placeholder keeping the seat warm for its rightful occupant. For those concerned about stability, I continued, nodding to Jonathan, who began distributing comprehensive information packets. Rest assured that this transition has been planned for years. Every detail, every contingency has been accounted for. I turned back to the room, noting how the morning light cast my shadow long across the boardroom floor. After all, I am my father's daughter, and if there's one thing Richard Hartwell taught me, it's the importance of playing the long game. The next hour unfolded like a perfectly choreographed dance as news of the revelation spread through the building. Employees gathered in clusters, their whispered conversations a backdrop to the corporate drama playing out in the boardroom. Those who had been loyal to my father's memory walked with newfound confidence, while others who had aligned themselves with Marcus suddenly found reasons to update their resumes. Sarah appeared at the doorway, tablet in hand. The first wave of international reactions is coming in. The Tokyo Stock Exchange has halted trading in all Hartwell-affiliated companies. European markets are scrambling to adjust their valuations. The Financial Times is running a special evening edition. I accepted the tablet, scanning the incoming data with practiced ease. Each market reaction, each analyst's prediction followed the patterns we'd anticipated. The financial world was realizing that Hartwell Global was merely the visible tip of a much larger corporate iceberg. Your father's old partners are calling, Diana added, her eyes gleaming. Especially Charles Montgomery from Montgomery International. Marcus's head snapped up at that name. Charles Montgomery had been his primary competitor for years, the one CEO he'd never managed to outmaneuver. Now the reason for those failures was becoming clear. Charles has always known the truth, I explained, enjoying the way Marcus's face contorted at this revelation. He and my father were planning the merger of our Asian operations when Dad fell ill. We've been quietly proceeding with those plans ever since. The Portland deal, Marcus whispered, realization dawning. Last year's failed acquisition attempt wasn't a failure at all, I confirmed. It was a carefully orchestrated step in a much larger plan. While you were focusing on the visible competition, the real work was happening behind the scenes. I turned to the board members. The Portland facilities are already being integrated into our Asian network. The paperwork will be finalized this afternoon. Rebecca, still watching from the conference room below, visibly flinched. She'd been the one to declare the Portland deal dead, proudly presenting her analysis of why it had failed. Her reputation as a strategic advisor had been built on such assessments, all of which she was now learning had been precisely what we wanted her to believe. Your entire marketing strategy, I continued, addressing her directly through the screen, has been based on incomplete data. Those market trends you've been tracking, they represent barely 30% of our actual global operations. The color drained from Rebecca's face as she frantically began typing on her phone, no doubt trying to access the report she'd based her career on, but her access had already been revoked. Her carefully curated digital empire reduced to empty folders and denied permissions. Jonathan stepped forward with another set of documents. These are the preliminary terms for the Montgomery International merger. As you'll see, the groundwork has been laid over the past decade through a series of seemingly unrelated joint ventures and minor acquisitions. The board members pored over the papers, their expressions a mix of awe and dismay as they realized the true scope of what had been happening under their supposed oversight. Every failed deal they'd criticized, every missed opportunity they'd lamented had actually been part of a master strategy they'd never glimpsed. The Asian markets open in 4 hours, I noted, checking my father's watch. By then, the full extent of Hartwell Holdings' global presence will be public knowledge. I suggest those of you with significant market positions contact your financial advisors promptly. Jonathan Pierce cleared his throat. The regulatory implications have been fully addressed. I cut in smoothly. The SEC has already received comprehensive documentation of all holdings and transactions, unlike some people. I glanced pointedly at Marcus. We believe in absolute transparency with regulatory authorities. Marcus's lawyer, who had been frantically making calls in the corner, suddenly looked up with fresh alarm. The SEC filing, I continued, includes the San Francisco expense reports, every detail, every hotel booking, every private dinner, every questionable allocation of company resources. The ethics committee will have quite a lot to discuss at their next meeting. I paused, letting that sink in. Though I suspect the discussion will be rather one-sided, given that most of the participants in those expenses will no longer be employed here. Rebecca's screen suddenly went black. She had finally realized the full implications of her position and fled the conference room. Security would ensure she left the building without accessing any sensitive areas. Her personal belongings would be packed and shipped to her after a thorough review for any company property. The press conference is scheduled for 2 warm, Diana announced, entering with a fresh stack of reports. All major financial networks have confirmed their attendance. The Wall Street Journal is requesting an exclusive interview for their weekend edition. I nodded, already anticipating how the narrative would unfold. The story of a corporate heir who had watched silently as her husband built his career on her family's legacy, only to reveal her true identity at the perfect moment. It was the kind of drama the financial press lived for. One last thing, I added, turning back to the stunned room. Those of you wondering about your own positions in the company's future, consider this meeting your first evaluation. Your reactions, your choices in the coming hours will determine whether you have a place in Hartwell Holdings' next chapter. The board members straightened in their seats, suddenly very conscious of their every expression, every word. They were realizing that while they'd been watching Marcus, evaluating his performance as CEO, someone else had been watching them, measuring their true worth to the company's future. The executive floor had transformed into a command center of calculated chaos. Phones rang incessantly, emails flooded in from every time zone, and the constant hum of urgent conversations filled the air. Through it all, I maintained my position at the head of the boardroom table, watching as the carefully laid pieces of my plan clicked into place. Goldman Sachs is on line 3, Diana announced, appearing with yet another stack of urgent messages. Their analysts are recalculating their entire market projections based on the Hartwell Holdings revelation. Morgan Stanley and JP Morgan have requested emergency meetings. I smiled, remembering all the times these same institutions had dismissed my input during social events, treating me as merely the CEO's decorative wife. Now they were scrambling to understand how they'd missed the presence of one of the largest privately held conglomerates in the global market. Marcus sat slumped in his chair, his earlier bravado completely evaporated. His lawyer had abandoned any pretense of control, now frantically reading through employment contracts and non-compete clauses. Every few minutes, another notification would ping on their phones, another business contact distancing themselves, another opportunity evaporating. The San Francisco team is requesting clarification on their reporting structure, Jonathan noted, reviewing updates on his tablet. Apparently, several executives there have suddenly remembered meetings with a consulting team that visited last quarter. Ah, yes, I replied, enjoying Marcus's confused expression. That would be when I personally reviewed their operations, though they knew me only as Mrs. Hartwell, making a social visit with her husband's overseas partners. I turned to the board members. It's amazing how much people reveal when they think you're just a corporate wife taking an interest in your husband's work. Jonathan Pierce shifted uncomfortably. Those private dinners at your house, the strategy discussions. I continued. Were quite illuminating, especially when you all felt comfortable speaking freely in front of the quiet hostess who kept your wine glasses filled. I met his gaze directly. Tell me, Jonathan, how is your daughter enjoying her position at Rebecca's former marketing firm, the one that mysteriously won several major contracts after you introduced Marcus to Ms. Morgan? Pierce's face drained of color as he realized the extent of my knowledge. Every casual conversation, every seemingly innocent business dinner had been an opportunity for intelligence gathering. While they had underestimated me, I had been building a comprehensive map of their connections, their motivations, their vulnerabilities. The PR team has prepared initial statements for all major markets, Sarah reported, entering with a fresh set of documents. Asia-Pacific releases are ready for review. European statements will follow within the hour. I nodded, accepting the files. Each press release had been crafted months in advance, waiting for this moment. The narratives were carefully calibrated for different cultural contexts. The Asian markets would respond to the story of a dutiful daughter honoring her father's legacy, while European outlets would focus on the strategic brilliance of the long-term deception. Your father's old office has been prepared, Diana added quietly. Everything is exactly as he left it. Marcus's head snapped up. That office has been sealed since you claimed it was being renovated. I finished for him. In reality, it's been maintained as the command center for Hartwell Holdings' global operations. Every major decision this company has made has originated from that room. I stood, smoothing my skirt. Would you like to see it after all? You've spent 15 years wondering what was behind those locked doors. The walk to my father's office felt like a procession. Board members and executives lined the hallway, watching as I led the stunned group toward the supposedly abandoned corner of the executive floor. Marcus trailed behind, his steps heavy with the weight of realization. The doors opened silently, revealing a space that was both a preserved memorial and a modern command center. My father's mahogany desk dominated one end, while the opposite wall displayed a bank of screens showing real-time data from markets worldwide. Family photos lined the shelves, not the formal portraits Marcus knew, but intimate moments. My father teaching me to read financial statements, my first board meeting attendance at age 12, the day he officially named me his successor. Everything makes sense now, one of the board members whispered, taking in the sophisticated setup. The mysterious strategy shifts. The perfectly timed market moves all coordinated from here. I confirmed, moving to stand behind my father's desk, my desk now. While Marcus played CEO in the public office, the real decisions were being made in this room. I activated the main screen, revealing a comprehensive organizational chart. Welcome to the heart of Hartwell Holdings. Gentlemen, I trust you now understand why today's revelations were inevitable. Marcus stared at a photo on the desk, one taken at our wedding. In it, my father stood beside us, his hand on my shoulder, a knowing smile on his face. 15 years later, that smile carried a very different meaning. The Tokyo market opens in 30 minutes, Jonathan announced, checking his watch. Shall we begin the next phase? I settled into my father's chair, feeling the weight of generations of Hartwell business acumen settling around me. Yes, I replied, I believe it's time to show the world exactly what Hartwell Holdings is capable of. The Tokyo markets had barely opened when my phone began lighting up with messages from a different sector of my life. The social circles that had defined my existence as Marcus's wife, the country club wives, the charity board members, the social committees I'd served on while quietly gathering intelligence about their husbands' business dealings. Mrs. Rothschild is quite insistent about speaking with you, Diana reported, a hint of amusement in her voice. She mentioned something about reconsidering the chairmanship of the hospital board. I allowed myself a small smile, remembering how Barbara Rothschild had subtly shouldered me aside during last month's committee elections, claiming the hospital board needed someone with real business experience. The irony was delicious. Tell her I'll consider it during next quarter's review of our medical investment portfolio, I replied, watching understanding dawn on the board members' faces. The hospital's major funding, they were realizing, came from one of Hartwell Holdings' subsidiary foundations. Marcus's phone buzzed continuously. Country club members suddenly canceling their golf games, business associates developing scheduling conflicts, social acquaintances sending awkward messages of support that carefully avoided taking sides. His social capital was evaporating as quickly as his professional authority. The Edison Group's CEO is on hold, Sarah announced. Apparently, they're very eager to discuss that joint venture Marcus rejected last month. Put them through to conference room C, I instructed. Have them speak with our actual development team. I turned to Marcus. You know, the one that's been running parallel negotiations while you played at being in charge. His face reddened as he remembered his bombastic rejection of the Edison proposal. How he'd lectured their board about understanding true market value. Now he was realizing that his declaration of corporate independence had been nothing more than a performance, watched and managed by the true power behind his throne. Rebecca's assistant reports she's trying to access her social media accounts from home, Jonathan noted, checking his tablet. All company-related platforms have been secured. I nodded, unsurprised. Rebecca had spent years building her image as a corporate influencer, posting about leadership and women in business. Her carefully curated online presence had been part of what attracted Marcus the illusion of a power couple in the making. Ensure her termination agreement is clear about confidentiality requirements, I instructed. We wouldn't want her attempting to monetize this experience through a tell-all post. The board members shifted uncomfortably, no doubt remembering their own social media activities. How many of them had shared Marcus's posts, endorsed his business insights, hitched their professional reputations to his supposed expertise. The Westbrook Foundation is requesting confirmation about next month's charity gala. Diana added, given the circumstances, the gala will proceed as planned, I interrupted smoothly, though I believe the guest list may need some revision. I met Jonathan Pierce's eyes, particularly regarding the seating arrangements at the primary donor table. Pierce swallowed hard. The Westbrook Gala was the social event of the season, where business deals were made and corporate alliances formed. The seating chart was a carefully orchestrated display of power and influence, one that would now reflect the true hierarchy of Hartwell Holdings. Charles Montgomery's wife sends her regards, Sarah mentioned, a slight smile playing at her lips. She particularly enjoyed last week's garden party. Marcus's head snapped up. Garden party. You said you were at a spa retreat. I was having tea with Margaret Montgomery and several other corporate wives. I corrected, discussing the upcoming merger while our husbands thought we were sharing beauty tips. I paused, letting that sink in. Though, in your case, the husband in question was rather preoccupied with his marketing director. The reminder of his indiscretion hung heavy in the air. Several board members suddenly found their phones fascinating, avoiding Marcus's gaze. They were all calculating the social cost of their association with him, realizing that their wives would soon be navigating a very different corporate landscape. The Four Seasons has called about your standing reservation, Diana noted, directing this to Marcus. Apparently, there's some confusion about the corporate account. Cancel it, I instructed, along with any other accounts he's been using for personal entertainment. I met Marcus's eyes. I believe Ms. Morgan will need to update her expense reports as well. The implications were clear. Every dinner, every weekend getaway, every supposedly discreet rendezvous had been monitored and documented. The paper trail of their affair would become part of the corporate record, a cautionary tale for future executives who might consider mixing business with pleasure. The social secretary would like to know about this evening's symphony gala, Sarah added. You're scheduled to present the Hartwell Foundation's annual donation, which I'll do, I confirmed, as the foundation's actual director, not as the CEO's supportive wife. I turned to the board members. I trust this clarifies any confusion about the foundation's funding decisions over the past decade. They nodded slowly, understanding dawning. The charitable giving they attributed to Marcus's corporate generosity had been another chess piece in my larger game. Every donation, every sponsorship had been carefully calculated to build the relationships I would need when this day arrived. Your father's club has already transferred your membership to the primary position, Jonathan reported. The president sends his congratulations and mentions something about a long-standing arrangement. I smiled, remembering my father's words years ago. The old guard always knew this day would come. I explained to the room. They've just been waiting to see how it would play out. The afternoon brought the first real attempts at resistance. Marcus's allies, those who had built their own positions on his supposed authority, began emerging from their initial shock to mount what they believed would be a counteroffensive. Their efforts would have been admirable if they weren't so painfully predictable. Gerald Matthews from Legal is requesting an emergency meeting with the board, Sarah announced, entering with a fresh stack of urgent messages. He's citing corporate bylaws regarding leadership transitions. I exchanged a knowing look with Jonathan. Gerald had been one of Marcus's first hires, a lawyer who had helped structure numerous deals to maximize Marcus's apparent control. Show him in, I instructed. Let's see what creative interpretation he's discovered. Gerald burst into the room, clutching a leather portfolio stuffed with documents. His usually polished appearance was slightly disheveled, his tie askew from what had probably been hours of frantic legal research. This transition is procedurally irregular, he declared, spreading papers across the table. According to Section 7, Paragraph 4 of the Corporate Charter, the 1995 Charter, or the actual 1980 founding documents, I interrupted smoothly. Because I believe you're working from an incomplete set of bylaws. Gerald? I nodded to Jonathan, who produced a significantly older and thicker document, the original Hartwell Holdings Charter, Jonathan explained, which supersedes any subsequent Hartwell Global documentation. As you'll note, the succession protocols are quite clear. Gerald's face paled as he scanned the yellowing pages. Every argument he'd prepared, every legal loophole he'd thought to exploit was systematically dismantled by the founding documents he'd never known existed. But the board approvals, he tried again, were obtained 15 years ago. I finished for him. When my father restructured the company specifically to accommodate this eventual transition, I slid another document across the table. Your own employment contract, in fact, includes a clause acknowledging the authority of Hartwell Holdings' leadership structure. Page 23, I believe. Marcus watched this exchange with growing desperation. Gerald had been his ace in the hole, the legal mind he'd relied on to find ways around corporate obstacles. Now he was watching his last hope of resistance crumble under the weight of decades of careful planning. The Tokyo market has closed, Diana reported, entering with a tablet displaying financial data. Hartwell Holdings' revelation has triggered a complete revaluation of all Asian assets. The numbers are significant. I studied the figures with satisfaction. The market had responded exactly as predicted, recognizing the true value of what had previously appeared to be unrelated companies and investments. Sir Richard Bennett is on the line from London, Sarah added. He says it's about the European merger discussions. Marcus's head snapped up. What European merger? The one you've been unknowingly preparing for over the past 3 years. I explained. All those subsidiary acquisitions you pushed through, thinking they were your idea. They were positioning us for this exact moment. The board members exchanged glances, suddenly reviewing every major decision they'd approved under Marcus's leadership. How many other strategic moves have been subtly guided by unseen hands? Rebecca's lawyer has sent a letter, Jonathan noted, scanning his tablet. She's claiming wrongful termination and threatening to go public with insider information about company operations. I smiled, remembering all the confidentiality agreements Rebecca had signed, each one carefully worded to protect Hartwell Holdings' interests. Send her the complete documentation of her contract violations. Include the surveillance photos from the San Francisco trip. Remind her that any public statements will trigger the non-disclosure penalties. Marcus shifted uncomfortably, no doubt remembering other trips, other meetings that might have been documented. You can't just erase people's careers, he protested weakly. No, I agreed. People do that themselves when they choose to violate their fiduciary duties. I turned to the board members. Speaking of which, I believe several of you have some interesting stock transactions to explain to the SEC. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Every trade, every suspicious timing of purchases or sales around major company announcements had been noted and documented. The oversight they thought they'd escaped had been constant and comprehensive. Charles Montgomery is hosting a dinner tonight to discuss the Asian market response. Diana mentioned. He specifically requested your attendance as Hartwell Holdings CEO. The emphasis on my new title wasn't lost on anyone. Marcus had spent years competing with Charles, never understanding why he couldn't gain the upper hand. Now the truth was clear, he had never been playing at the same level. Gerald, I addressed the still-stunned lawyer. I believe you have some documentation to review. Jonathan will provide you with a complete set of corporate records. I expect your full report on any potentially problematic transactions by tomorrow morning. Gerald nodded numbly, recognizing the implicit message. His choice was clear: adapt to the new reality, or join Marcus in professional exile. Around the table, other executives were making similar calculations, their loyalties shifting as rapidly as the market valuations. One last thing, I added, standing to assert my position. For those wondering about their future with Hartwell Holdings, remember this moment. Your reactions today, your choices in handling this transition will determine whether you have a place in what comes next. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows through my father's office windows as I prepared for my first public appearance as Hartwell Holdings CEO. The transformation from Marcus's quiet wife to corporate leader wasn't just internal, it required a careful orchestration of every detail. The press conference setup is complete, Diana announced, entering with a garment bag. Your father's personal stylist sent this over. She says it's exactly what he would have chosen for such an occasion. Inside was a perfectly tailored Alexander McQueen suit in deep charcoal with subtle pinstripes that echoed the Hartwell International logo. The cut was impeccable, designed to command attention rather than blend into the background as my previous wardrobe had been chosen to do. Margaret Montgomery called, Sarah added, checking her tablet. She's arranged for the other wives to be watching the broadcast from the country club. Apparently, they've reserved the main dining room. I smiled, imagining the scene. All those women who had patronized me over the years, who had dismissed my quiet observations during their gossip sessions, about to witness exactly who they'd been underestimating. Rebecca has been trying to contact several financial journalists, Jonathan reported. However, they seem more interested in speaking with the actual Hartwell Holdings CEO. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. Rebecca had spent years building her network of media contacts, positioning herself as an insider with access to corporate power. Now, those same journalists were ignoring her calls in favor of the real story. Marcus sat in a corner of the office, watching as my team prepared for the press conference. His expression shifted between disbelief and growing comprehension as each detail revealed another layer of my long-term planning. The outfit you wore to the San Francisco deal signing, he said suddenly. It wasn't new, was it? It was my mother's, I confirmed, remembering the day she had worn it to her own first board meeting. I had it altered years ago, waiting for the right moment. Every piece I've worn to major company events has carried its own history, its own connection to the Hartwell legacy. The board members who had been reviewing market data looked up with renewed interest. They were beginning to understand that every detail of my appearance, every seemingly casual choice had been part of a carefully crafted narrative. Your father's watch, Jonathan Pierce noted, gesturing to my wrist. You've been wearing it all year. Since the exact day I gained majority control of the final shares needed for this transition, I confirmed. Though everyone assumed it was simply a sentimental choice, a daughter wearing her late father's timepiece. The weight of the watch felt different now that its true significance was known. Every tick had been counting down to this moment. Every glance at its face, a reminder of the approaching revelation. The hair, the makeup, the subtle changes in your wardrobe. Marcus continued, his voice holding a new note of understanding. You've been gradually transforming yourself, haven't you? Getting everyone used to seeing you differently without realizing it? I moved to the full-length mirror that had been installed in my father's office decades ago. Specifically for moments like this, the woman reflected there was a perfect blend of Hartwell authority and feminine power, exactly the image my father had helped me craft over years of preparation. The social pages called it a style evolution, I noted, adjusting my jacket. They attributed it to Rebecca's influence, assuming I was trying to keep up with my husband's glamorous new companion. None of them noticed that each change aligned perfectly with major company milestones. Sarah approached with a jewelry box I recognized from my mother's collection. Inside was the Hartwell family signet ring, resized years ago to fit my hand. The board photos have been updated throughout the building, she reported. Every portrait of Marcus has been replaced with the historical progression of Hartwell leadership, ending with you. Marcus stood abruptly, moving to the window. Below, media vans were arriving, setting up for the press conference that would formally announce the change in leadership. His own image was already being erased, his legacy reduced to a footnote in the Hartwell family history. The European markets have closed, Jonathan announced, reviewing the final trading data. The complete restructuring of Hartwell Holdings' public profile has triggered a massive revaluation of all associated companies. The financial press is calling it the Hartwell Revelation. I slipped on the signet ring, watching how it caught the light. The family crest, which had seemed like a simple decorative element to outsiders, was actually a subtle reminder of the power structure that had always existed behind the scenes. Your father's original office in London has been reopened, Diana added. The executive team there is standing by for your first international video conference as CEO. The pieces were falling into place with practiced precision. Each location, each team member, each detail had been prepared for this transition. The quiet wife who had watched from the shadows was stepping into the light, revealing herself as the architect of a global business empire. It's time, Jonathan announced, checking his watch. The media is ready. I took one final look in the mirror, seeing not just my reflection, but the culmination of years of careful planning. The transformation was complete, from the subtle power behind the throne to the queen taking her rightful place in full view of the world. The press conference room buzzed with anticipation. Journalists from every major financial publication filled the seats, their cameras ready, tablets poised to document what was already being called the business story of the decade. The room itself had been subtly transformed. The backdrop now displayed the complete Hartwell Holdings logo, rather than just the Hartwell Global branch that Marcus had always showcased. Financial Times is leading with the headline, "The Hidden Queen of Wall Street," Sarah whispered, showing me her tablet. Bloomberg has already updated their billionaires list. You're now officially ranked higher than Marcus ever was. Marcus, seated in the front row between two security officers, flinched visibly at this news. His own net worth had been largely illusory, built on stock options that were now worthless and positions that had never been truly his to claim. The divorce papers have been prepared, Jonathan murmured, placing a slim folder on the podium, along with documentation of all company assets that were mistakenly attributed to Marcus's personal wealth. I smiled, remembering all the times Marcus had boasted about his financial acumen, how he'd built his fortune through shrewd business decisions. Now everyone would know that his supposed personal investments had been carefully managed Hartwell Holdings operations all along. Rebecca has arrived, Diana reported via earpiece. She's in the media overflow room, apparently trying to convince reporters to hear her side of the story. No one seems interested. The irony was perfect. Rebecca, who had planned to leverage her relationship with Marcus into greater social and professional prominence, was discovering that her carefully cultivated influence had evaporated the moment the true power structure was revealed. Charles Montgomery is on his way, Sarah added. He's bringing the final merger documents, the ones Marcus thought were still in preliminary negotiations. I nodded, adjusting my father's watch. The merger that Marcus had spent months trying to prevent would now be announced as part of Hartwell Holdings' global expansion, a deal that had been in place since before he'd even known Rebecca existed. Ladies and gentlemen, the PR director began, please welcome Elizabeth Hartwell, CEO of Hartwell Holdings and majority owner of the Hartwell Global Group. The room erupted in camera flashes as I approached the podium. Every step was measured, every movement choreographed to project the authority I'd always possessed but never publicly displayed. The watching journalists leaned forward, sensing that the prepared statement would be just the beginning of a much bigger story. 15 years ago, I began, my voice carrying clearly through the room. My father entrusted me with not just a company, but a legacy. He taught me that true power lies not in its display, but in understanding when to reveal it. Marcus shifted uncomfortably in his seat. He was finally understanding all those long conversations about business strategy that I'd encouraged during our marriage, realizing that every suggestion I'd made had been carefully calculated to guide the company according to my larger plan. Hartwell Holdings has always operated as my father envisioned, I continued, with patience, precision, and a clear vision for the future. Today, we're not announcing a change in leadership, we're simply making public what has always been true. The screens behind me filled with data charts showing Hartwell Holdings' true market position, diagrams of its global network of companies, evidence of its long-term influence in international markets. The journalists' fingers flew across their keyboards, trying to capture the scope of what was being revealed. For those wondering about recent events, I added, my gaze sweeping over Rebecca in the overflow room. Let me be clear, every decision, every merger, every strategic move has been part of a carefully orchestrated plan. Some people's roles in that plan were more temporary than they realized. The implications weren't lost on anyone. Board members straightened in their seats, executives adjusted their ties nervously, and somewhere in the overflow room, Rebecca's dreams of corporate ascendancy crumbled to dust. As for the future, I continued, nodding to Jonathan, who began distributing comprehensive information packets, Hartwell Holdings is embarking on a new era of transparent leadership. The strength we've built in the shadows will now serve us in the light. The packets contain details of upcoming mergers, strategic partnerships, and global initiatives plans that have been years in the making, waiting for this moment of revelation. Marcus stared at the documents, recognition dawning in his eyes as he saw how many of his independent decisions had been subtly guided toward this outcome. Questions? I invited, watching as dozens of hands shot up. The first journalist stood, notebook ready. Ms. Hartwell, when did you decide to reveal your true position? The decision was made 15 years ago, I replied, enjoying Marcus's sharp intake of breath. Everything since then has been preparation for this moment, including my marriage to the man who thought he was building his own empire. The room erupted in furious note-taking and whispered conversations. Through it all, I maintained the calm demeanor of someone who had always known exactly how this story would end, because, in truth, I had. Every step, every decision, every carefully orchestrated moment had led to this the day when the quiet wife in the background stepped forward to claim her throne.